Welcome all to the first of many wargame reviews by D6 Eclipse. Following our mission statement of highlighting those games hidden by the big beasts of the industry, today's subject will be a small skirmish game called Dead Gods. Created by Scott Malthouse of Trollish Delver Games, Mr. Malthouse has been designing tabletop games since 2009 and has worked with Cubicle 7, Osprey Games, Open-Ended Games, and Necrotic Gnome. There's a bit of a wrinkle here, however. Most of Mr. Malthouse's work has been on tabletop role-playing games and not war games. While we can discuss long and hard over the details, I feel it's not exactly controversial to say that while they have certain similarities, wargames and RPGs are not the same thing. Understandably, I was a tad concerned, especially considering this was their first foray into writing an actual wargame. But let's break it down. Dead Gods is a skirmish wargame, costing a whopping $2 for 4 pages of content, so 50 cents a page. This isn't a bad deal for a rule set, especially one that's cheaper than some soft drinks here in the UK. Of course, what makes it better is that the cost is entirely negotiable. Yes, it's pay what you want, but the recommended $2 feels very fair in my opinion. As an aside, Dead Gods is available through Wargame Vault and the author's own various pages. He has one on Itch.io, I believe. Back to the game, however. The design and layout of Dead Gods is quite simple, very eye-pleasing, with a single piece of public domain art on the cover, which always impresses me because it's so easy these days to use AI art, which... how can I put it? I'm not a fan of, and I realise it causes a lot of consternation amongst the community. But either way, the art they use has been well chosen. It evokes the feeling of something supernatural or weird in the old pulp magazine sense of the word. The rules themselves are clear, concise, and laid out very logically, avoiding the pitfalls that frustrate me in other more professional books. But can't seem to contain themselves or understand that you need to lead a new reader into the rule set. One thing Mr. Malthouse does that I greatly appreciate, however, is list his inspirations within the text. He highlights specifically A Song of Blades and Heroes, Frostgrave, one-page rules, and Games Workshop's Middle-earth strategy battle game. You can tell from this alone the kind of game you'll get, and it certainly delivers in that regard. Dead Gods is a skirmish game, as I said earlier, one that requires between 3 and 9 28mm miniatures at the most. However, obviously, you can scale up or down as long as you scale up and down the appropriate gaming area. In this case, the suggested gaming area for 28mm miniatures is a 3x3 board or a 2x2 footboard, covered in terrain for your usual line of sight blocking, as is the way with most skirmish games. D6s are the order of the day for dice, and while not suggested in the rules themselves, I feel a few tokens wouldn't be amiss to highlight certain effects. The actual rule system itself is fairly simple, working on an equal or below dice roll mechanic. The fluff that you get is bare bones, but gets the ball rolling. As the title suggests, every god has died. Murdered. Who? How? Why? No one knows. We're just ants looking up at titans after all. Unfortunately for both us and them, this grand act of deicide has left the world covered in giant corpses of long-dead pantheons. Not only a health hazard and an eyesore, these fast-rotting gods have also littered the world with their divine relics. Whether their bodies are part of the loot isn't stated, but it's heavily implied. Now, you and your buddies are gathering these relics to ascend to godhood or other more nefarious deeds. Every model in your gang, or war cult as they phrase it, has 6 stats: activation, movement, battle, fire, defense, and momentum. Your pretty standard move, punch, shoot, save combo, though activation and momentum stand out. We'll get back to those though. So, you start the game by rolling for initiative. Simple enough. A d6 roll-off with the highest going first, and the last player to activate going first in the next round. Next is activation. This is where the statistic from earlier comes in. You choose a model and roll 2d6. If both dice are equal to or lower than the model's activation stat, you can do 2 actions. If only one is equal or below, you can only do 1. If neither dice are equal or below, however, the model counts as unruly, which is a status effect, and you pass to your opponent if he has eligible models to activate. Once a model has completed all its actions, you may then choose another model to attempt to activate. This is a fairly simple, swingy way to jump between players, and adds an element of randomness to planning your next move. While you've 11 profiles to choose from, only 4 are above activation 3, so there's a heavy 1 in 4 chance of you passing your turn over to your foe. It doesn't clarify what happens if, for example, you or your opponent just hit every activation number without fail, but then you refer to the golden rule, as it calls itself. The golden rule being, whenever you can't decide on a rule, go with whatever is the most fun, or roll for it, which I would simply say is, after you activate all your minis, your opponent can activate his. You have 5 actions: full movement, charge, full fire, focus shot, and claim objective. Full movement is, as it says on the tin, move your full movement allowance, though you can only move through friendly models, which is always good to clarify, I find. Charge is full movement into base contact with an enemy model, make an attack, then immediately end your activation. This is pretty clever as it avoids someone just hanging around to swing twice, while also giving an element of risk to your choice. You can strike your foe, but mess it up and that's it. They're done. Move on to your next activation. Full fire is your ranged attack at 12 inches, but if you have previously moved, you have a +1 dice penalty to your shooting attack. Focused shot is the same as above, except you're at half range, so 6 inches, and there's no penalty for moving. Finally, we've claim objective. A little odd, seeing it explicitly as a main action, since it's usually a sub-action, but it makes sense. You simply secure a sacred relic by rolling a 1 to 3 on a d6. Now, that, I suspect, could get irritating in games. With a 50% chance of grabbing the objective, I mean, it's a way of doing it. Combat is quite easy. Whoever charged rolls 1d6. If it's equal or under their battle stat, they've scored a hit. Above, and they've missed. Either way, their opponent moves their model 1 inch backwards. If they were hit, however, the opponent has to roll under the hit model's defense stat on a d6. If failed, place a wound token next to the injured model. Shooting is much the same, merely requiring you to have line of sight to your target and them to be in range. Roll 1d6, and if it's under your fire stat, you've hit them. Then it's the same as above, with your foe rolling under his defensive stat on a d6 or getting a wound token. After that, it's just bric-a-brac like shooting twice, concealment, rough terrain, climbing, and objective claiming. A note on the last one, however. Dead Gods has the same grabbed objective, half movement for you thing that Frostgrave has, which I've always had misgivings over. I feel it slows the game down far too much, though the suggested board size, including 2 foot by 2 foot, at least mitigates that a bit. 2 remaining rules stand out, however. The wound tokens I mentioned earlier? Well, they add +1 to each activation roll, on both dice, meaning you have greater and greater chances of dropping to a single activation, or even unruly, which, when wounded, means dead. Yes, get enough wound tokens to fail your activation test on both dice, and you're dead. It's a surprisingly elegant way of dealing with the situation, doing away with wound numbers or mucking around with how debilitating wounds can be to your stat profile. Now, remember the momentum stat? Well, it's actually a resource. You can spend 1 momentum point to reroll all your dice or move an extra 3 inches. This is clearly the Middle-earth inspiration at work, but I think it works really well and can help swing things around if you feel the dice are just not going your way. After that, it's merely a glossary of special rules and the model profiles you can choose. What about missions, though? Yes, that's a bit of a problem. You see, there's a grand total of count them 1 missions. It's more a setup guide than anything really, with the objective being just to grab the loot and get off the table. Now, here is where I'd be shaking my head and saying how disappointed I was, and that Dead Gods had fallen into the same trap so many indie rule sets do, with cool rules but no missions to play them in. At least I would, if not for their expansion, Dead Gods Unholy Scavengers. Adding 20 new profiles, 10 new rules, and 5 new missions, it's very much a must-have. Thankfully, it's pay what you want again, with a recommended price of $2. So for less than $5 overall, you get 8 pages, 6 scenarios, 31 model profiles, and a game that's pretty quick to play. Now, here on D6 Eclipse, we don't believe in number ranking systems. What's a 5 to me is a 10 to you, and so on and so forth. So I'll say this instead. For the price you pay and what you get out of it, Dead Gods and Unholy Scavengers are a must-buy if you're interested in quick, easy skirmish fun. It's not a particularly complicated rule set, and I feel that you could easily get a couple of games in within a few hours, and even with a little homebrew you could work yourself into like a nice campaign or something like that. With that said, this is D6 Eclipse Jimbo signing off. See you later, folks.